Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and welcome to the 6th season of The Follow-Up. Hard to believe we're going into our 6th year. It goes so fast when you're having fun. Changes to term limits for state lawmakers is on the ballot on November 8th. So what's wrong with the current system and how do advocates want to change it? James Hohman is the Director of Fiscal Policy for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He joins us live right here in the studio for his take on the term limits debate. But first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the show. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook and Twitter. There's the information for you. You can email us or you can dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to view any of our past shows, just log on to deltacollegepublicmedia.org. As I said, James Hohman is here from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He is their Fiscal Policy Director. Great to have you on. You've been on a few times and you have a great expertise, so we're glad to have you back for our 6th season and opening the show. And just let the viewers know, we were hoping to have WSGW's Art Lewis on the show. We still may have him later in the show, so stay tuned for that. I think maybe he's having some technical issues. In the meantime, James and I are going to have 27 minutes door to door and have some fun with that. Term limits. So let me just start here to set the table. There are 3 statewide ballot issues that we're going to be voting on November 8th. The one on abortion, since the High Court sort of ruled on Roe versus Wade, put that in the hands of the state. Michigan voters are going to get a chance to vote on that. We're going to talk about voting rights a little bit. And the one we're going to focus on now with you is Proposal 1 and changing term limits for state lawmakers. Now, you're not here tonight to tell us how to vote on that issue, but really you're here to tell us, provide, I guess, some context to help us better understand what's at stake, right? Tell us about sort of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the way that I look at my job on this thing is just to answer some questions that voters are likely going to have about what they're being asked to vote on. Like, what does this do to term limits? What are its likely effects? And then to kind of lay out some reasons why some people might like that or might oppose it. And so I dug in on questions like, okay, I'm hearing that this is going to strengthen term limits by lessening the maximum amount of time the legislator can serve from 14 to 12 years. And my answer is like, okay, what is that going to do to average legislator service? And answer questions like that.
Well, that's good because I know in the past the Mackinac Center and the work that you do will come out with particular stands on things. You come on the show and we kick that around. So this is good.
Yeah.
Providing some education, some information, let the viewers sort of decide if this is a good thing or not a good thing.
And certainly we do advocate for things, but on these ballot questions, we're here to help voters find out for themselves whether they like it or don't like it.
So we do have a graphic that I'd like Bob to pull up, and here it is, that sort of outlines the Proposal 1 on the term limits. We've got that up, kind of show the viewers what they'll see at the ballot. And we'll touch on sort of the second part of that later in the show on financial disclosures. But ultimately, as you see it on the screen, supporters of this proposal will say this will allow for state lawmakers to gain more experience and ultimately be better for Michigan taxpayers because they won't have to be running for re-election so often. What else do we have here? Allow lawmakers the option to serve 12 years in any combination in the House or Senate. Representatives now have about a 6-year term. It should go back to what it says on 1. Reduce the total years a politician can serve in the state legislature from 14 to 12 years. And then require state lawmakers to file a financial disclosure form on the Secretary of State's website. Michigan and Idaho are the only states that do not require annual financial disclosures.
And New Jersey.
Okay, well there's a third one there.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It gets kind of messy. Every state's different with their financial disclosures, but Michigan, New Jersey, and Idaho are the only ones that don't have them.
So I'll go back to what I was saying before. You know, supporters will say that this will kind of get people from not running for re-election so often. In the State House, you can serve a maximum of 6 years would be 3 two-year terms. So what do you make of that theory, I guess?
Okay, so I looked at all the legislators who have served in Michigan after the term limits proposal happened, excluding the ones who are currently serving, since term limits haven't obviously taken their effect on them yet. And there's 582 legislators, which is a lot, but it's been over 20 years. And what I found was that the majority of them, 54% of all legislators, leave not because they serve their maximum allowable term, but rather because they serve that House term.
Sure.
As in, you serve 6 years in the House and you aren't able to find a Senate seat. And that's what you would expect. There's 110 seats in the House. There's only 38 in the Senate. Senate seats you only run every 4 years, so that's half as many times you've got to run for election.
Sure.
And their terms are a little bit longer. You get 8 years, a maximum allowable term of 8 years in the Senate. So very few people actually serve out the maximum allowable times under our current term limits rules. If a legislator leaves, it's not because they're voted out of office or they lose a primary or
Sure.
they find some other role. It's because they run up against that 6-year limitation. And so if you change that to 12 years, you're going to wind up with a lot more people serving for 12 years rather than 6 years. Now, again, supporters say that's a good thing. Opposition says it's a bad thing. And they all have their different reasons for thinking so.
Sure. So we just had redistricting.
Mm-hmm.
Every 10 years we do that. So the timing of putting sort of the term limits on the ballot, did redistricting have anything to do with that, do you think?
Probably not.
Okay.
I mean, this has been an issue that I think, it's one of the first, to change term limits is one of the first bills that gets introduced in every session, because legislators want to keep serving until they decide to stop.
Sure.
I mean, that's just a general tendency. If you're going to put in the time and effort and that it takes to run for office, you don't want to just leave because term limits, because you run up against term limits. So it's been a long-standing thing. I think there's been a lot of interest, both Republicans and Democrats, who've been interested in trying to put something on the ballot that they think that voters would be able to approve. And they were able to do some coordination to get legislators the vote sufficient to put it on the ballot this year, which is why we're going to be voting on it. I think it's been a long time coming. And in fact, there was a similar situation that happened like this in California in 2012. California had the exact same term limits that Michigan has, and they put it on the ballot to change term limits to this 12-year limitation, just like is going to happen in Michigan. And so that was a fun thing to check on to see whether my idea that this would happen would, whether those effects would apply here in Michigan. And they do.
Okay.
In general, since term limits have happened, legislators in their assembly, which is their version of the House, have served longer, and leadership tends to serve longer. In Michigan, House leadership tends to last for just 2 years. Since they passed it, they've had a leader serve for much longer.
See, that's the interesting point, that supporters will say sort of how it's written now, given the changeover in the House and Senate, what you're talking about happens so quickly. Mm-hmm. Supporters of Proposal 1 will also say that the lobbyists, special interest groups are pretty much running the show in Lansing because you have too many experienced lawmakers kind of coming and going.
So I have heard that too, and I'm very skeptical because some of the biggest supporters of this proposal were the lobbyists, this conventional Lansing interest. And there's a reason for that, which is that, look, under term limits right now, especially for the House, you're talking about an average turnover of around 36 seats each year, where you've got a new face coming in. And lobbyists want to have a relationship. They want to have convinced you of something. They want to have sold you on something. And then once they've convinced you, you don't have to keep convincing them year after year. And so that will limit it down to maybe 9 per year if things were evenly rotating, which they're not, but that's a lot fewer people that you've got to convince to come over to your side to explain how your policy works. It's just a much easier job for conventional interests. But I think the question is not who is going to have the power, but for citizens that are considering this, the question that they have to answer, and it's going to require their own judgment, is if my legislator serves longer, Are they going to better represent their constituents' interests? That should be the thing that matters.
That's the essence of this, absolutely.
And
sure.
the people who want shorter term limits or current term limits would say that more frequent elections among new candidates, as in the guy ran out of office, we've got 2 new people running, is a better way to ensure that their constituents' views are served. Whereas the proponents will argue that if the longer a legislator serves, the more they understand their district, the more experience that they gain to better serve their constituents. And I think which side of those, I think, is the thing that ought, or which of those beliefs is the thing that ought to drive voters as they consider this proposal.
It's a very important issue. The other part of this proposal that I thought was kind of funny that was sort of put on the proposal has to do with calling for state lawmakers to be required to file financial disclosure statements with the Secretary of State every year. I think that seems to make sense to me, and yet Michigan is one of only, I think, 2 states that hasn't required that.
Yeah. So I looked into this, and I think the important question, the important thing for voters to consider is these are meant to prevent corruption. Is there any evidence at all to suggest that they do? And when I looked at it, there's not a lot of interest in studying that question. In fact, there was only one academic paper that looked at that connection of whether financial disclosures prevent public corruption. And it found that at the state level, no, it doesn't, or at least she wasn't able to find enough evidence to suggest that they do. However, she also asked prosecutors whether they like having financial disclosures to review, because it's got to be prosecutors who identify and charge lawmakers with corruption. And they found that prosecutors tend to like them, or at least most thought they were helpful. So I think there's something to be said for it. When I look at corruption around the country, these financial disclosures are only meant to identify one type of corruption, which is legislators passing laws that serve their direct pecuniary financial interests. That's only one kind of corruption. There's plenty more. So like this can do something. And also when you look around the country at why these financial disclosures happen, they're often in response to corruption, which is to say, we found that our legislators were dirty, we want to prevent this in the future, we need to pass these laws, which makes them more evidence of corruption than preventative measures against corruption. That being said, that's not the case here in Michigan.
Right.
I think the people who put this on the ballot were doing it for legitimate purposes.
Right, but it fits right into the transparency issue, which the Mackinac Center has been a huge advocate for, right?
Oh yeah, but this is a different kind of transparency.
Okay.
Like most of the transparency that I think citizens should care about is making sure that that what government does is transparent and accountable, and we can understand why it happens. This isn't exactly that. This is kind of casting a vague aspersions that all legislators and all office holders are corrupt, and the only way that we can keep track of them is to clearly know their direct financial interests. It's a very small part. I mean, like there was one case of corruption recently that was about a guy who was allegedly trying to sell his vote in exchange for campaign contributions. Well, campaign contributions are already disclosable information. It's a different kind of corruption that exists.
Sure.
We also have legislators who try to pull their weight as office holders to get out of drunk driving tickets. That's not something that's going to show up on a financial record. So again, a particular kind of corruption. I think people might find them useful, but I suspect that like if you're trying to understand a legislator's motivations for being in the legislature, you should follow the fact that they want to be legislators. Most of them want to serve their constituents' interests. They don't want to sell out their districts. At least that's my belief going into it.
So for viewers that want to learn more about your take on this, you're working on a brief, and where can they see it, and when is that going to be out?
Yeah, we provide analysis of most of the ballot proposals that come out. Hasn't been published yet. My brief hasn't been published yet. I'm working hard with the editors to get that out soon, and when it comes out, I hope next week, they can check it out at mackinac.org. And that's M-A-C-K-I-N-A-C, like the island, not the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to stick around. I'm going to bring you back on later to record our after show to talk about Governor Whitmer and the roads. Also going to talk about the state budget. So I'm going to let you go. Hang on a second, because I'm going to bring on my buddy Art Lewis, as promised, from WSGW. He joins us now. Art, good to see you.
Good to see you.
As I said at the top of the show, This is our 6th year of the follow-up. I always have you on for the season opening show. I was a little worried that our winning streak was going to end there, but lo and behold, there you are. So keeping the tradition alive. Good man.
No, it's my fault. I lost track of time and panicked because what happened literally, Mike, I was flipping through the TV and saw the follow-up on TV listings, and I went, oh! So here I am.
Well, that's okay. You're a pro. I like to think I am, although James Hohman's the real pro because he's the guy that's bailing us out and doing a good job. So let's get into, I was going to talk about some rapid-fire issues that you and I are going to kick around for a few minutes here. I want to start with the midterm elections. Let's go with the national stage. Republicans, as you know, seem positioned to make some noise, maybe enough to turn over both the House and the Senate, given President Biden's 2 years in office that haven't gone so well, depending on which side you're on, I guess, with the economy the way it is and some other things. Do you think this is a referendum, going to be a referendum on the Biden administration so far?
Well, I don't, historically, and your guest can comment on this later too. Historically, the party in power weakens at the midterms. That's history. In this particular year, originally, if you looked at all the polls back in the spring, they were saying that the Republicans might pick up as many as 35 seats in the House and probably a few seats in the Senate. As we sit here today, those polls have tightened a lot. They're saying maybe 13 seats in the House. Senate could be an iffy question if they can actually win the Senate. What's changed? Well, I think what's changed, particularly on the political landscape, is Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Supreme Court and its decision to remove the protections of Roe have set up a firestorm in some areas of the country, like Michigan, because of the 1931 law that was on the books that would have automatically made abortions illegal. I think that some states that might have been considered swing states otherwise probably have moved now in the direction of the Democrats because of Roe v. Wade. So that's probably changed the landscape a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting because when that ruling came down by SCOTUS in June, it said, well, yeah, we're going to let the courts decide, each individual state decide. So in Michigan and other states that actually have it on the ballot, that's why it's become the hotter issue aside from some others. So there are a handful that's becoming the big topic in the election, right?
Yeah. It is, but that's the big topic in those areas,
right.
Like Michigan. I still say nationally the big topic is when you go to the grocery store and you see the prices of food. You go to the gas station, you pay your energy bill, your heating bill, or your air conditioning bill. To me, that's the biggest issue that drives the elections. Again, in certain areas that may not be true, but overall, nationally, I still believe it's the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, today I was doing some research, and some of the polls say economy, inflation, education, and crime are the top issues driving voters around the country. Hey, let's talk about the governor's race here in Michigan. Governor Whitmer versus Tudor Dixon. Governor, as you know, Whitmer has raised a boatload of cash, appeared to have a kind of a sizable lead, as much as double digits a month ago. Polls kind of come and go a little bit. The margin is starting to close a little bit. And again, it's probably about which camp gets their people to the polls the closer the race. I wouldn't say Whitmer's unbeatable, but I think it's going to be a closer race than you think.
Well, I would have said that before the Supreme Court decision. I think the Supreme Court decision landed squarely in Whitmer's camp. So I see Whitmer, Nessel, and Benson not really being in jeopardy from where I sit. Whether I like them or don't like them is
right.
The point. The point is, what's reality? Reality is abortion is driving the election in the state of Michigan. And their positions coincide with the majority of voters, at least according to what we hear in the polls. And I think that's going to be the deciding factor. So I would have to give the edge to the governor and the Secretary of State and the Attorney General right now.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about this fun immigration debate, and I'm sarcastic about that. It's a mess. Tens of thousands of immigrants are crossing the border every day, primarily into Texas and Florida, so much so the governors in those states, DeSantis and Abbott, respectively, are shipping these folks by the thousands in planes, trains, and automobiles, right, to sanctuary cities all over the country. Be careful what you wish for. So much to unpack here. I mean, where do you house these people? At what cost? They're talking about building tent cities. It's just a total mess.
Well, it's nothing new. It's been a mess for a long time. Now, we haven't seen this kind of fight between the South and the North, so to speak, where we're actually moving people around. But let's remember that the immigration topic has been kicked down the road by Congress after Congress after Congress, by president after president after president. And while President Trump tried to do something about it with his suggestion that we put up a wall, and he actually started the wall, at the same time he did that, illegal immigration increased because people wanted to get across before that wall was built. And at the same time he did that, he reduced the number of green cards in immigration. So it's been a history of government inaction, which kind of cascades and builds until we are today where we are, seeing them come across the border by the thousands, the ones we know about, and then there's the getaways, the ones we don't know about. And I don't see anything changing right now. A lot of talk, not a lot of action.
Well, and of course, we're paying for it as taxpayers. We're paying for the transporting them up to the north. We're going to pay to feed them. We're going to pay to house them. We're going to pay to shelter them. I mean, and we just can't figure it out. I don't know why, but it's that gridlock in Congress, and it's
why
just
is because they don't want to. They just do not want to face it. It's a tough subject, and it needs to be addressed because, I mean, the reality is, if you have a sieve for a border, then you don't have a country because you can't have a country without borders. And if the border is wide open, you might as well just erase the line. I mean, it makes no sense.
Right. Well, you touched on President Trump, and I can't let you get away without talking about him a little bit. So the latest is he continues to kind of face the slings and arrows of his opponents. The Democratic side, the latest being the investigation over these classified documents that he may or may not have at his home in Florida, and then the Attorney General in New York leveling charges against him over real estate dealings and tax evasion. It goes on and on. It seems to be nonstop. It depends on who you talk to, whether it's warranted or not. But I mean, bottom line, they just don't want him running in 24 because his base is still pretty strong. So where do you want to go with that?
Well, I think, first of all, you're right. They don't want him running in 24. And I think that's what this has been all about from the beginning. Let's separate it into different subjects. Let's look at New York State first. New York State, that Attorney General ran on a platform saying she was going to get Trump. She wasn't even in office. She had investigated nothing. But she told everybody she was going to get Trump when she came to office, and it became her obsessive focus. Now, did she find something worthy of prosecution, worthy of suit? I don't know. Maybe. Did he inflate values? I don't know. By the same token, you have to ask yourself, the banks he was doing business with, if he was inflating values, why weren't they asking for their own appraisals? I suspect they were. So I kind of look at that as really a political act. The documents at Mar-a-Lago, that could be another situation. I mean, there's been a lot of attempts at connecting Trump to January 6th, to trying to impeach him twice. There's been all of that in the past. I think what happened at Mar-a-Lago presents the greatest threat to him Because remember, if you are indicted and convicted of something, you can't run for president. So that's, I really think that's the goal. I don't think we'll see anything happen until after midterms. But I think that part of his problem is himself, in a way. He kind of invites this stuff with his personality and with his actions sometimes. So I can't sit here and tell you nothing is going to happen to Donald Trump. I really don't know. I suspect somewhere along the line somebody's liable to put some teeth in this.
Yeah, well, let's just say he sort of sidesteps this classified document investigation, somehow is able to get through that sort of unscathed. And I'm just looking into a crystal ball. Let's say he runs. Let's say DeSantis runs. And they're sort of like going down that path, and the Republican base has to go, okay, DeSantis over Trump. And if by some chance DeSantis starts gaining, do you think ever President Trump would ever tell his base, okay, just go over to DeSantis. I'm a big boy. Let's do that. Do you think he'd ever give that up for another candidate?
Remember, it would have to be a primary. So DeSantis, if he wins the primary, and this does so reasonably decisively, let's say, yeah, I think Trump would. I'm not altogether sure Trump is going to run, nor am I altogether sure Biden is going to run. Right now, as I sit here, I have a clearer view of a DeSantis-Newsom race than I do a Biden-Trump race. Could be way off, but that's just the way I see it right now.
Well, it's fun to talk about, which is why I threw it out there, and you and I have known each other for a long time, so we can talk about anything and look into any crystal ball we want. So you have a show, I have a show, so we can always have some fun with that. So, hey, it was good to have you on. Better late than never. We kept our streak alive having you on the debut show in our 6th season. I appreciate it. We will tune in tomorrow to WSGW like we do every morning to the Art Lewis Show. Art, thanks again.
All right, Mike, thanks for having me. Sorry I was late, and good luck with the new season.
All right, my friend. Take care. Thank you. And that's our interesting seasoning opening show for tonight. Be sure to join us again next week. We'll focus on the voter rights proposal 2 on the ballot in November. Does it go too far? That's next week at 8 p.m. on The Follow. In the meantime, hit me up on social media or dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to view any of our past shows, log on to deltapublicmedia.org. Thanks for joining us tonight. Have a great night. I'll see you next week at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night.